The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Welcome. I think most people know me, and but for those who are new, my name is Sarah. My Dharma name is Dōjin, and I use the pronouns she and her. And I'm one of the head priests at Stone Creek. And I'm happy to be here with you all this morning. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to give a talk. August was a beautiful, buffet of different speakers. And then we were away for the first time since the pandemic, and now Jisha's away for the first time since the pandemic. So we're just working with that. And speaking of the pandemic, just in thinking about talking this morning, I just wanted to pause and recognize the many stressors that are ongoing for the community at Stone Creek, and really for everybody everywhere. It's such a long time to live with a lot of uncertainty and to not be able to gather physically, and I can see in my own life, there was a feeling that things were going to start being more predictable, and then now they've gone back to being less predictable, and just naming how that this is stressful, like it's a taxing. And then there's also that the building of Stone Creek itself is under renovation, and that's going the way it's going, and there's its own stressors there, and then there's the process of Charlie and I leaving over the next year, and just wanting to pause and acknowledge, and looking for a new teacher, and like that all of these elements they're stressors that we as a Sangha are sharing among others, and I'm just naming the fears and discouragements and confusions that can come up with all that, and wanting us to hold all of this gently together and in compassion, and really draw on the Dharma that supports us in uncertainty and in impermanence, and also in our connections to one another. I want to begin today by offering a possibility to sit with some terms in meditation. So this is just an offering, if it works for you. You don't have to do it. But what I want to offer is that we kind of take the physical and mental posture of meditation or zazen practice. So get comfortable and upright if you want to participate. And then I want to just drop some terms into this, into our field of meditation together, and bring the mind, the way that we can kind of see our mind in meditation that has its own flavor. Bring that flavor to what arises in your mind, kind of an open curiosity. So if we ground in a zazen posture, both physically and mentally, and I offer the word good or goodness, what comes to mind? Or what comes to body? Maybe it's more of a sensation than an idea. What does that word mean to you? How did that get there? Is that sense available? Like, where did, for each of us, our ideas of goodness come from? And they're probably way too various for us to name. But does something specific come to mind, and what is it? And how does it feel? And I want to offer another word or term or an idea, which is badness. Does a sensation or an image or an idea come for you? And do you know where it came from? And how is it? How does that concept live for each of us, in us? And what about the idea rightness, being right? How does that live in you? How does it feel? And where did it come from? What does it mean for you to be right? And lastly, what about wrong? Where does that concept live in you? How does it live in you? What does it feel like? You could maybe even call to mind something recently where you were wrong about something. You know, maybe it was small. Maybe it was relatively neutral. But how was it? When you give yourself that label or take that on, what happens in you? So thank you for trying that experiment with me. And I offer this because you know, when I've looked at this in my life, I see that these origins of these ideas are really old. A lot of conceptions around good and bad and right and wrong go deep into my early childhood, and one of the things I can see for myself is that if I don't keep my eye on them, they function in very dualistic ways, and they exclude one another. So there's a feeling that there's like a solidness to right or wrong that can't, and there's no overlap, or there's a feeling that there's a concrete and solidness to good or bad, and they can't overlap, and that comes from my early conditioning. And just, you know, it's not everyone's conditioning, I think, but I've interacted with a lot of people that seem to share that conditioning. And I think in the Dharma, it's really good to welcome this kind of meditation in sometimes, where we specifically look at something. Because these are powerful archetypes, good and bad, right and wrong, and how they move in us and what they do in us. Another thing I can see for myself was that a sense of being good and right for me, and again, I've seen this demonstrated in other folks as well, again, not universally, but was tied to my sense of acceptance and belonging from early childhood. And And so I hold, there's a kind of fragileness and a kind of tenderness and vulnerability in which I hold those senses of myself. There's a way that it's important for me to see myself as being good and right, and usually this is all unconscious, as a way to feel like I have a solid sense of acceptance and belonging, almost like my survival depends on it. Because I think when we're young and these things were being encoded, it did in a way, at least psychologically and sometimes even physically. Acceptance by the people in power around us who were taking care of us depended on often them feeling like we were good or being good. And so there's something deep there and tender. And I think it's good to, as a dear Dharma colleague, Dalila Bothwell says, we have to see ourselves coming. We need to see ourselves coming. We need to know what the deep, tender taproots are that we carry and why we carry them and what they do when we move around in the world and they get activated. I can see in myself, and again I've experienced in many other people, a longing for a set of rules to follow that would allow me to have like the answers, so I could just be good and right, and then I could just relax, and my sense of belonging, I would be beyond reproach, you know. I can confess that there's a part of me that has that longing. So that I could be done. It's not even really, maybe, I don't even know if it's so much that I could be done out of a feeling of laziness. It's just because it's so uncomfortable to feel my sense of acceptance and belonging be shaken. So as a self-protective thing, there's a grasping toward, like, can you just give me the set of rules and then I'll be okay. And, life is way more complicated than this. We know, one of the, Suzuki Roshi says, like, the most important thing for a Zen student is to not be dualistic. So that right there, we're encouraged to challenge a dualistic sense of good and bad and right and wrong. Over the years that I've been at Stone Creek, I've often heard it expressed by many people, a desire to have a more inclusive and diverse Sangha. And, inclusivity and diversity operates along a lot of spectrums. One thing I think we do wonderfully at Stone Creek is we have a physical environment that's not perfect, but it's fairly welcoming for people of a wide range of physical abilities. I love that at Stone Creek, half of our Zendo is chairs. And on a Sunday, I think like 3/4 of our seating is chairs. Just the physical presence of that communicates something that says, and I only thought about this recently when I went to a Zendo where there were no chairs. There was only cushions on the floor. And I was like, oh, but what about people that doesn't work for? I didn't think to ask that, unfortunately, in the moment. So we have an environment, and as we're renovating the building, actually, some of it's governmentally mandated, but even without it, even when we weren't sure if it would be, we are making plans to make it more physically accessible for someone that maybe has a walker or a wheelchair or uses that for mobility. And Stone Creek was founded by Jisho, who was an out lesbian decades ago, when being an out lesbian was not so normalized and had more risk to it. Jisho, I think it's okay to share, has experienced discrimination within Soto Zen for being gay, for being queer. And still, we're, as a Sangha community, I feel we're still growing our welcoming for queerness. We're growing are welcoming for folks who are non-binary, folks who are not in the gender binary. And we're growing our welcoming also of people of different ages. We've tried lots of things over the years to welcome children, to welcome families, to welcome teens sometimes. We just keep trying, you know. And there's a desire expressed by many people. We also want to be a welcoming environment for people of color, so to have more racial diversity, to be more racially inclusive. And all this effort to be inclusive involves many things. There's a theme in the input that I've received as a teacher from people of color about something that would be more to grow at Stone Creek in order to grow the capacity to be inclusive of people from different races and different ethnic backgrounds, and also of different racial locations within the racialized structure of the United States. And you know, so again, it's only one facet, but it's an important facet that I've heard a number of times, which is, could we develop more normalcy around systems of feedback at Stone Creek, so that when a person has an experience of harm on any level, you know, even kind of a relatively small harm, but I don't actually know if harm can be on a spectrum. When a person has pain from something that another Sangha member said, could we develop the skills of input and feedback? And particularly, I think it's fair to say that the cultural norms at Stone Creek, in terms of racial culture, are come from white culture. The ways that we in the Sangha communicate, a lot of them come from white culture. Not that white culture is a monolith, but there are some themes, you know. Conflict avoidance, I think, is one of them. And elevating comfort over truth, or over really hearing a variety of experiences, can sometimes happens in environments that are white culturally dominated. And elevating the comfort of white people over the comfort of people of color is something that can happen, does happen. And this is particularly tender and also potent when there's a disconnection between the intent and impact, which we've talked about in other times at Stone Creek. So when someone offers some words into a Dharma context, and the intention, often actually, I think most often it happens when the intention is to be inclusive, and the intention is to be opening or expressing a longing for a more diverse environment, but the impact is painful. I can say for myself as a white person, hearing that feedback, there's a bunch of defensive structures in between hearing that feedback, because I was taught stuff like intention's all that matters. You know, if your intention was good, you're good. Maybe because of that longing for having absolute, you know, rules. But it's not the case, actually. We can be, I mean, but then of course there's also that expression, what is it, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know who said that? I'm sure somebody knows who said that. I'm sorry that I don't. Yeah, good intentions can cause harm, or we can be in a state of good intention and cause harm. And what happens as a community, and for me specifically, I'm talking about at Stone Creek and really in Sangha, what happens for us when that happens? Are there mechanisms by which we can hear one another? I know that your intention was not this, but I'm telling you the impact was this, and I would like you to hear that. Do we have systems in place? Do we have or do we have cultural practices in place, and do we have skills in place that we can collectively receive that input, that feedback? And I think the request is not simply like, could it be heard and tolerated, but can that feedback change the environment? Can we not only hear ourselves, to be curious, to be engaged, and to be changed? There's an institute at Berkeley. I think it might have grown out of the Berkeley Law School, actually, called the Institute of Othering and Belonging. And I think it was founded by John A. Powell, who's a wonderful bodhisattva. I have a bunch of resources, so I'm going to put them, this is one I'll put in here, into the chat. And I want to also tell you his quote about belonging. He says, belonging means more than just being seen. Belonging entails having a meaningful voice and an opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structures. Belonging means having a right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. And I would like to add religious institutions and Buddhist institutions. It's the concepts of, I only understand this a little bit and I'm trying to learn more, but the concepts of othering and belonging are almost like a new frame around inclusivity. That, when a place is inclusive to everyone, actually, ideally, and to a wide range of people. But to get there means that, if historically the cultural norms have been white dominated, the cultural norms have to change. But I love this term belonging, because I think it, first of all, it just taps into something so deep and vulnerable in a great way for most human beings, and a longing that we naturally have. And I think it's deeply what all of us want. But, I'm saying us, and I don't mean to speak for you. Maybe you don't want belonging. I don't know. But when I hear people, when people talk to me about Stone Creek, I think most people that I know of would agree. We want it to be a place of genuine belonging. We want Sangha to be a place of genuine refuge and belonging. Refuge is another word that I feel akin with belonging. I can't think of anyone at Stone Creek that I could say, do you want Stone Creek to be a place of refuge? And usually it's what we're seeking ourselves in seeking Sangha. It's always what I'm seeking. So what would it look like? I think it's okay to acknowledge that it's not yet super normal at Stone Creek to have mechanisms of feedback. Oh, sorry about the freezing. I am going to buy a booster. And we don't have it yet. Sorry, we restarted our internet this morning in a hope of not freezing. Maybe. Sorry that you have to piece together what I'm saying. And I'm working on it. There's another work in progress. I wanted to share what happens for me when I receive feedback from people, especially in a juncture, at a node where the feedback I'm getting is that whatever my intention was the impact was different than I intended. Just to kind of talk through like how that works for me as a Dharma teacher. When I am getting feedback, especially when it's challenging feedback to hear, one of the things I try to do is to ground myself in the possibility that this feedback that's coming is an offering. Even if, and especially if I'm feeling falsely accused, which happens probably more often than we think. A Dharma teacher that I did many practice periods with at Tassajara, Reb Anderson, he was teaching about the sense of self, and his teaching was, because people were like, I don't think I have a sense of self. That's great. I think I was one of those people. I'm like, I don't know. I can't locate my sense of self. I'm just drifting around in emptiness. I'm fine. I'm good. He offered, if you think you have, if it's hard to find a sense of self, look at what happens when you feel falsely accused. What happens in you? And my teacher Galen is a student of Reb's too, and she brings this up with me often. When she's like, "Oh, are you feeling falsely accused?" And I'm like, "Why, yes, I am." And then I know it's a place of strong engagement in my practice. One of the places it can happen really quickly is when I'm like, "Well, but I'm good, and you're telling me I'm bad." That's a juncture where a lot of defenses rise up quickly for me. So I try to ground in like, okay, this is an offering. And usually if somebody is risking to make it, there's some investment in our relationship. I'm trying to remember that. And usually there's a possibility for deepening in our intimacy and our connection. But that's been my experience over the years. If I can stay with it, even if it's painful and I don't like it, usually our relationship can grow. And still though, I have the conditioning that I have. And so it depends on what the context is, but one of the things that can happen is that, or one of the things I've witnessed in myself is that I get a physiologic response that's like a lot of agitation and overwhelm, and then my brain goes like, and I'm not receptive because I've like because some part of me is so threatened that I really can't be receptive. I've watched this happen. I usually only notice the buzz in my brain, and then I notice that there's a whole bunch of physiologic stuff happening. And in my most present and skillful moments, I've been able to say to the other person, I really want to hear what you have to say. Can I get back to you? And then I go and I take a few moments or maybe a couple days to hang out with my conditioning and tenderly and compassionately spend time with the conditioning I've received that will throw up a lot of defenses to hearing what this other person has to say. And that's become, I don't mind this process anymore. I welcome it. And I still experience a lot of physical and psychological discomfort. I'm not so afraid of discomfort anymore, or maybe I'm like building my capacity to be with it. So I can say as a white, like here's some examples, as a white Dharma teacher who talks about race somewhat regularly, over the years I've received so for a while there was a genre of feedback, particularly from people in my life who are people of color, of like, essentially it boiled down to like, you are really setting off the triggers I have around know-it-all white women. That's an archetype that's out there, the know-it-all white lady. And in my effort to kind of, I don't know, be right, I could set off that pain for people. I probably set it off for white people too, actually. But it has a particularly quality of pain for many people in my life who are people of color. So it's like, could you not talk like a know-it-all about race since you're white and you don't know it all? And they were much more skillful than that. I'm just trying to sum up. and I could receive that feedback. And then one of the things that happened is I think I overcompensated, and so not even in recent months, even when I've talked about race, I have received the feedback from Dharma siblings of color. Your self-deprecation is not helping anybody. And again, they were much more skillful than I'm being right now, because I went too far. Like I have to like demonstrate all sorts of humility. One that I live with as a white Dharma teacher who wants to be able to talk about and stay in dialogue about race and Dharma is, can I be upright and in humility without falling into separate self-deprecation and without falling into conditioning I have around seeming right and seeming knowledgeable when I'm not knowledgeable. And again, like that feedback has, that time that I have to hang out with my conditioning has gotten shorter, and my reactivity has gotten less, and my defensiveness has gotten less, in part because I have a lived experience that if I can stay with those conversations, if I can stay with that feedback, my relationship with the people giving it grows, and I develop as a human being. I get closer to the person I want to be, and the values I hold. As I was thinking about this, I was reminded of an article that I read by Evan Fortin, who is, for people in Sebastopol, you may know the Zen teacher Chris Fortin or Bruce Fortin, who was born at Green Gulch Farm and grew up in Sebastopol. Evan is a white, identifies as a white man who I think, actually I'm not sure, I think his gender spectrum is more fluid than that, but he identifies as male and white, and he works with kids and as a teacher and as a mentor. And he wrote this article. He's actually, I think it's from a book he's writing, that he wrote an article called Resilient Accountability. I'll put the link to that article in the chat. And in it, I hear his, I don't know where Evan identifies in terms of Zen, but he was around it a lot as a kid, and I think it's in his life. And he talks about encouraging, he particularly talking about working with children who identify as male, so teen boys. He said, I encourage the teen boys to celebrate their mistakes as like an essential thing, as an essential corrective to a lot of the other messages they're getting. And when he sees them meeting their mistakes with defensiveness and react, know that they were never given the skill set to be comfortable with uncertainty. And that just makes me think, Zen! Zen gives us the skill set to be comfortable with uncertainty. So he writes, and I changed the wording. He was writing about the boys, but I've changed the them here, which was referring to the boys, to us. And what I mean by us here is us as practitioners, or us in Sangha, us and we. If we grow the capacity to learn from mistakes, we can better hear and empathize with those around us without growing defensive. This is resilient accountability. It is a different form of strength and resilience than is usually expected of us. Instead of suppressing difficult and complex feelings, we can have the integrity and fortitude to look at them head on and be willing to look at the responsibility we can take in the situation. And in that article, there's a heading that says, doing something wrong doesn't mean being all wrong. So that challenges that idea of a concretized duality of right and wrong. And he says, we have a wrong-right binary embedded in many facets of our society. It's endemic in sports, pass, fail, win, lose. And if a person regards their mistakes as a loss or a failure, it can get locked into an identity for them as someone who's bad or incapable of change. And then he goes on to say that if that happens, then it makes sense that a person would then isolate themselves into more and more homogeneous groups. He says, barring the door and keeping themselves safe from further encounters with the uncomfortable. But then consequently barring the door from keeping themselves from encounters with other perspectives, other vantage points on life. And interestingly, it involves a duality, but I want to offer a quote from Nelson Mandela that I've really been appreciating, which is, I don't lose, I either win or I learn. So he's using a win-lose binary that maybe is not so helpful. But I think there is something for us as Zen students to take from that I'm either in alignment with my values, just that. And to bring it like right home into the Zen tradition, there's a long history of an idea of one continuous mistake. Have people heard that expression? That Zen is one continuous mistake, or that to be human, to be alive, is one continuous mistake. And that's a really important idea, I think, because when it happens, when I have conversations with people, when it happens as a priest sometimes, and I'm having conversations with people because someone has been harmed by something that's been said, and now I'm bringing that feedback. It's so important to have this idea of one continuous mistake. There isn't an expectation that the mistakes will never happen. But the request is, can we develop skills around what happens when they do? The mistakes are a tricky word, but I think it's more like, when moments of unskillfulness or moments of our conditioning, moments of, just bad wording that comes from, a whole lot of conditioning that's it's really not totally within our control. There is no amount of good action that I or any of us can do that will inoculate us from causing harm in the future, because we're complicated human systems. There is no, you could be good for 6 weeks in a row, quote good, you could be skillful, but harm will happen. But what do we do with it when it happens? Can we receive the input? And also, and I don't know if it's conversely, but right along with that, there is no amount of bad that we can do that makes us irredeemable. There's no amount of unskillfulness that happens that means that we are cut off from learning, from growing, from reconnecting with each other, from healing the wound, and from going forward together. It can feel that way, sometimes. It can feel like some people are irredeemable. If we think about the ideas of wrong, or we could also use the binary of good and evil, we may have been taught, or implicitly, their actions are beyond redemption. In the Dharma, that's not the truth, because there's no such thing as a person, actually. So there's no way that there's a person that could be irredeemable. There are, unskillful actions. There are harmful actions. But how do we work with them? This idea of one continuous mistake, it could also, the images of a filing a file. And again, it encourages us to realize, like, it's a process of engagement. Ethical behavior or upright behavior is a process of ongoing engagement. It's not a destination that we get to and we get to stay at. Suzuki Roshi in Zen My Beginner's Mind says, when we reflect on what we are doing in our everyday life, we are always ashamed of ourselves. Dogen Zenji says sho shaku ju shaku, which means shaku generally means mistake or wrong. So sho shaku ju shaku means to succeed wrong with wrong, or one continuous mistake. According to Dogen, one continuous mistake can also be Zen. A Zen master's life could be said to be so many years of sho shaku ju shaku, so many years of one continuous mistake. This means so many years of one single-minded effort. And in the Shobogenzo, Dogen Zenji says, mistakes are learning. So the offering I really want to make today is, can we hold that sensibility together at Stone Creek? We do, actually, in some measure. Can we really root in that together, in our effort to make a more inclusive, to create an environment that has a possibility to be more inclusive? Can we root in this possibility? Can we say, like, so it's not blaming or it's not wallowing, but it's just like, if somebody makes an offering of, this thing was said and it felt uncomfortable, or it hurt me, or it gave me pause, or it made me move away, can we tend to our how that feels to us when we hear that? And then, can we support one another to the next thing that happens, that we get curious? So if somebody says this, they pause, ground, care for being on the receiving end of that, and then is it possible to say, can you tell me more? I want to hear more. I want to understand. To me, this gives us the possibility of a community of wholeness, including our mistakes, including the pain we have, including the pain we cause one another. I had this thought that, it's true in all sanghas that people cause one another pain. But I think it's true of all human places where there are human beings interacting. We cause one another pain. But what do we do with it? And in a place that's rooted in the Dharma, can we do something different than we're offered in dominant culture, which is to pretend like it's not happening? Can we bring it forward into the light and hold it as an offering and receive it as an offering? I have had over the years a number of conversations with folks as the priest, as in the position of priest. I have received the feedback of somebody who's, and then had the job of bringing that feedback to the person who said the thing that caused the pain. These are uncomfortable conversations for me, and usually for the other person. And nobody's died yet. And awesomely, I realized as I was reflecting on this, no one has left. No one has bailed on the Sangha or been like, I don't want to have this conversation, or I don't want to be here with you all. In fact, I pretty much every of these conversations that I've ever had, my relationship with that person deepened. At least that's how I feel. And our Sangha had broadened, like the Sangha ties that we have, even beyond the two of us, broadens and makes a wider field of welcoming. So this is my aspiration for Stone Creek, but really for all Sangha places, is that, and Dharma communities, is it's not just that we can tolerate such conversations, but that eventually we are enthusiastic about them, since I'm daring to dream. It's hard to be enthusiastic about super uncomfortable things, but I believe the Dharma supports us to be that. And I think one of the important pieces in that is that we dare to have these conversations with one another, and that we have a kind of critical mass of people having the experience of like, well, I had that conversation, didn't enjoy it, you know, well, didn't have fun, but I'm willing. And maybe some people have, some people have expressed, I'm grateful, I'm here, I'm staying, I want to know more. The last thing, sorry, it's getting long. There are two more things I want to put in the chat. The first is a link to Stone Creek's statement on inclusivity that is on our website. And Charlie and Jisho and I worked on it and posted. I think we've had it for a number of years, so it's a part of our institution. And I just want to read you what it says. Stone Creek Zen Center is dedicated to every one of us realizing our true nature. It is the deep intention of the teachers and the Sangha to welcome and support people of every race, nationality, class, economic status, gender, sexual orientation, age, physical ability, to engage this practice, to participate in this community, and embody this way of life. Stone Creek Zen Center is committed to carefully studying and uprooting all forms of oppression. If you experience or observe any expressions of oppression here, from an individual or through a program, policy, or decision, we invite you to speak about this with one of the teachers or a member of the board. Feedback may also be submitted by email. Link to contact info. All Stone Creek Zen Center teachers, leaders, and board members are urged to develop awareness of the depth and history of individual and institutional forms of oppression and to invite accountability at all levels of the organization. We aspire to make our practice offerings available to all who are interested, regardless of ability to pay. We encourage those who find any of our fees to be an obstruction to inquire about scholarships. May all be welcome, seen, and heard. In the spirit of harmony, of difference, and equality, may we respect, celebrate, and enjoy our differences, and may we realize and manifest how we are all equal. So again, this is both the intention, but also still aspirational. And how does it look when we make it true? So I welcome any thoughts or feedback or comments that you may have. Take your time.
Dōjin, thank you so much for your talk. I did want to just say that I was following along as you were reading that statement, and at the end of it, it's a little different on our website, and I think the language you spoke was better language. I think you used the word equal instead of same, and I think it's a much more powerful word. So I hope we can amend that. And then I thought it would be helpful for me. Many of the things you said resonated with me. Feedback is something that intellectually for years I have welcomed, and it has rarely been easy for me to accept. I think, there's a perception that was created in me, maybe. I don't know if it's ubiquitous or not, from like the Blue Cliff record and many of the old kind of Zen parables that a teacher was all knowing. And although that has been kind of debunked for me, in my life experience, it's still this really powerful draw. And I actually think it's an unhelpful thing in the Zen tradition. Particularly like as I've, both through you and things that were, explored white fragility and white supremacy, like to think that there's some person, right, who's got this all figured out and can verify whether you have it all figured out, right? That does have a place in the tradition, but it's also one that's potentially loaded and not in a place of feeling like feedback would be the appropriate thing. So I'd love it if you would just kind of discuss that dynamic a little bit.
I kind of just want to say amen. Amen. Like that, this is that idea of an all-knowing wisdom being is a lovely projection, and it doesn't apply to human beings, or Buddhas are. There's some kind of need that we have, and I love that you're one of the things I didn't include, but maybe I will in a minute, is a resource. It was Koshin Paley Ellison talks about healthy embarrassment and the need for that in healing in Sangha and in growing in Sangha and in the Dharma. That and it comes up actually. I have discussions with other Zen teachers at San Francisco Zen Center. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of where I did a lot of my training. It's almost like in the world of psychology, I see it too in the training I've done as a therapist. Like, this idea that you're a blank slate of all knowingness was somehow helpful. Maybe that worked for earlier generations. I don't know, but it's dangerous, and it's just not true. So I think there's something. I think a really important investigation is, well, why do I want that as a student, or why do I need that? Why am I seeking that? What is that in me? And then it's like, and then what are the relationships then? How do we learn from one another? How are their teachers? How does a person responsibly occupy a place of being a teacher and all knowingness? And I would say you welcome feedback and understand yourself to be human. And if that's intolerable to people, then why? It's always been true. Teachers have always been human, even those guys in the koans. Thank you, Barry, for your
Thank you.
vulnerability, bringing that forward. Anybody else would like to contribute?
Thank you for your talk. Sometimes I feel we, in our acknowledgement of diversity or that we need to, as a Sangha, acknowledge the diversity among us as we are. There are wealth gaps, mental capacity gaps, loss and grief gaps, healthy body gaps, and how these differences between us make us feel, are we belonging? Do we feel like we're belonging, or what are the obstacles to that, or the what makes us withdraw a little, or not express who we really are or what we're really going through. And I just feel as a Sangha, we could work on that in terms of communication, in giving room for that, and practice with acceptance of each other in all our differences, and that we could do more of that.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, right. That there's plenty of ground to meet in celebrating difference already. And there's plenty of obstacles to doing that skillfully already here, and we can work with those as a way to develop capacity, and also just as a way, right, like inclusivity is broad, like that. When I was thinking about the like physical accessibility of our Sangha being a consciousness that is pretty widely held at Stone Creek, maybe in part because we have a lot of elders in our community, so can we grow, like the way that we have that as something that's forefront in someone's mind? What does the community look like when that same consciousness can happen around gender oppression? As it's growing, and that same consciousness can happen around racial oppression. So that in the institution itself, there's a collective consciousness of what does it mean to make the ramps, make the physical structures that welcome, but doing that also psychologically and culturally. Thank you very much. Does that feel complete? Or what's the word? It's not complete. That's a, oh, sorry, I'm looking at Charlie, who's also here. Our teacher Reb would often, when you're in Dokusan, he'd be like, do you feel complete? And actually in that moment I would feel complete, but I think that's a little bit of a misleading thing, Do we feel like full for now? And in the process of ongoing relationship with one another? That's the question I want to ask. I welcome your feedback ongoingly. Thank you very much for being here. We'll close with a chant that's in the chat, and then have some time for announcements. For great Bodhisattva vows,
beings are numberless. I vow to free.
Visions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize